Close your eyes. Let the weight of the day slip from your shoulders like a robe falling to the floor of the soul. Tonight, I will take you somewhere the clocks have forgotten, where moonlight rests not on rooftops, but on ruins, where the sea remembers stories that even the stars no longer speak aloud. Tonight, we drift to Delos. Far in the heart of the Aegean Sea, there is an island cradled by water and warmed by centuries. It does not boast like Mykonos, nor does it roar like Crete. It whispers. The ancients called it sacred, not just because of what stood upon it, but because of what it felt like to arrive there. They said the air on Delos was different, that the wind came softer, as if carrying the breath of a god, that the light was gentler, sunlight washed in honey rather than fire. And the waves? The waves didn't crash. They sighed, like an old friend exhaling after keeping a secret too long. Sailors would speak of it in hushed voices, as if naming it too loudly might wake something sleeping beneath its stones. Because Delos was not always there. In the most ancient myths, they say Delos was a floating island, adrift like a dream. No anchor, no nation, just an open palm in the sea, waiting for a goddess in distress, for a divine birth, for a destiny to land upon its shores like a feather upon water. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Tonight, let us begin at the edge, not of history, but of feeling. Imagine the scent of salt on your lips, the faint shimmer of torchlight on midnight waves, the slow creaking of a wooden vessel as it glides over a sleeping ocean. You are on that boat now, aren't you? The sky is a bowl of ink, speckled with silver. The wind brushes your cheek like fingers dipped in lavender. And ahead, just barely visible, is the silhouette of an island. Small, silent, timeless. No laughter greets you. No harbor calls. Just the hush of something sacred. You step onto the shore, and the sand feels warmer than expected, as if the island has been holding the sun's last breath. Beneath your feet, crushed shells and ancient dust. Above, a sky that has watched this island sleep for thousands of years. The wind brings with it a scent, not just of salt and seaweed, but of laurel and old stone, of forgotten rituals, of sun-baked marble and the perfume of centuries. And there, in the distance, broken columns rise like ribs from the earth, their white surfaces glowing beneath the moon, as if they still remember being worshipped. There are no crowds, no footsteps but yours, and yet you do not feel alone. Delos is not empty. Delos is listening. Somewhere beneath the cracked temple floors, beneath the lion statues worn smooth by time, beneath the bones of market stalls and the roots of ancient olive trees, something remembers. It remembers gods being born. It remembers golden hymns rising with the dawn. It remembers secrets whispered into marble. And now it remembers you. So take a deep breath, not of air, but of myth. Let the island enter you like a slow tide. Let your thoughts soften. Let the hush of Delos become your lullaby. Because tonight, time has stopped, and you are safe in a place where stories sleep beside you. This is not just the beginning of a tale. It is the beginning of forgetting the world you left behind. You are here now, on the island where time stopped, and the waves are still whispering. The night deepens, the stars settle, and as the hush grows thicker around you, you begin to sense it, not with your ears, but with something older, deeper, the kind of sensing that belongs to dreamers and poets. A silence, but not the kind of silence you know, not the absence of noise. No, this silence is shaped. It has form. It has history. It belongs to the Cyclades. They are the scattered jewels of the Aegean, 24 inhabited islands, and many more that remain nameless, forgotten, or only visible to the patient eye. In Greek, The name Cyclades comes from Kyklos, the circle. They are said to orbit Delos like children around a sleeping mother, or satellites caught in the pull of something older than gravity. You see, even in silence, Delos has gravity. If you stand quietly enough on its shore, you'll hear it. Not a sound, but a weight. The pause between waves, the stillness in the olive trees. The way even the sea seems to hesitate before touching its sands. A sacred hush, like the moment between inhalation and exhalation. Some believe that the gods demanded that silence, that it was the price of presence. Because when Delos was chosen as the birthplace of gods, the other islands listened. They circled it like sentinels, forming a celestial choir of stone and salt and light. No island dared compete. They simply held space, as if the Aegean itself understood. When something divine enters the world, even the wind should bow. And so the Cyclades became guardians of a memory. They stood back and watched, and perhaps in their quietude, they also wept. There is something mournful in their silence, like the soft rustle of robes in an empty sanctuary, or the last note of a lullaby that never reached the ears of the child it was meant for. In the morning, they gleam white and sun-washed. Tourists sip wine and snap photographs, unaware of the centuries coiled beneath their feet. But at night, they return to themselves. The marble whispers. The winds carry old names, Mykonos, Naxos, Paros, but they all echo back to one center, Delos, a small, dry island with no freshwater source, an island that should have faded, crumbled, drowned beneath history. And yet, it remains. Why? Because silence has memory. Because some places are not meant to be loud to be eternal. They are meant to be still. And in that stillness, they preserve what the world forgets in its hurry. Close your eyes again. Feel that hush enter your bones. It's not empty. It's full. Full of unseen footsteps. Full of unanswered prayers. Full of the weightless breath of 1,000 forgotten pilgrims. This is not silence. This is presence. This is the quiet pulse of a world that once believed, not just in gods, but in meaning, in ritual, in the sacred rhythm of time held still. And here, surrounded by the Cyclades, Delos does not shout its story. It waits, and it listens, as do you now, floating, resting, wrapped in the soft hush of islands that remember. Before Delos was sacred, before temples or lions or the prayers of trembling priests, the island was a shadow, a presence whispered about in seafaring circles, but missing from maps, a place that seemed to float, not just across the sea, but between belief and legend. They called it the Invisible Island, not because it was cloaked, but because it was untethered, unanchored to earth, unclaimed by any people, drifting through the blue like a memory that hasn't yet chosen a home. The ancients believed Delos wasn't always here, that it moved silently across the Aegean Sea, a wandering cradle of potential, waiting to become real only when it was needed most. There are tales, soft as sea foam and old as moonlight, that Delos was born not of rock and lava, but of divine will, that Poseidon, the god of shifting seas, crafted it from coral and sky, and let it float like a feather across the water, unfixed and wild, a sanctuary waiting to be chosen. Others say it was never meant to be found at all, that Delos existed in a fold of the world, like a pearl sealed inside a shell, revealed only when fate required it. And that moment came, with pain. Leto, a Titaness veiled in twilight, wandered the earth swollen with the unborn twins of Zeus. Everywhere she turned, she was rejected, cursed by Hera, queen of Olympus. No land dared offer her shelter. No mountain, no meadow, no island would give her refuge. Until Delos, unclaimed, unrooted, undecided. It was the only land untouched by Hera's curse. Because it wasn't truly land. Not yet. It was a whisper, a breath, a possibility. Leto stepped onto its shore, and Delos, like a sleeping creature stirred by a dream, opened its arms. In that moment, myth says, Delos stilled. The winds calmed. The waves bowed. The stars above seemed to pause mid-twinkle, as if holding their breath. And Poseidon, perhaps moved by pity, perhaps obeying an older law, drove his trident deep into the seabed and fastened the island in place. The floating ghost became earth, and time, for the first time on Delos, began. But the island did not forget where it came from. Even today, when you stand upon its ancient stones, you can feel it, a faint pull beneath your feet, as if the ground still remembers its freedom, its drifting days, its refusal to belong. Some say this is why walking Delos feels different, like walking on a dream that only just decided to become real. The air wavers just slightly. The silence stretches just a little too long. And when you close your eyes, you could swear the island moves, not in space, but in meaning, because Delos has always been more idea than matter. A place not found, but revealed. A gift granted to those who are lost, who are hunted, who carry within them something sacred, and need a shore that does not judge. You may never find Delos on a map, but the soul knows where it is. And perhaps, on nights like this, nights wrapped in starlight and salt, you don't arrive at Delos. Delos arrives to you. So rest now. Let your thoughts drift with the island. You are weightless, just as Delos once was, a fragment of possibility floating in the quiet blue, waiting to be chosen by fate. And somewhere, beneath your dreaming body, the island sighs and remembers what it was like to be unseen. It is said that some places are born ordinary, and others are born waiting. Delos was the latter, long before pilgrims kissed its shores, before marble lions stood guard, before men carved columns into the sky. Delos was a womb, not of flesh, but of silence and promise. And from this cradle, gods were born. Let me tell you a story, not loud, but soft, because even gods once were fragile. Leto, daughter of the Titans, moved like twilight through the world, graceful, gentle, and chosen. Chosen by Zeus, and thus cursed by Hera. She wandered the world, a growing life swelling beneath her. Two divine children pressing outward from her belly, burning with light, with fate, with music and moon. But no one would take her in. No land, no city, no rock or root would offer her a place to rest. Because Hera, Zeus's jealous queen, had placed her wrath in every crevice of the world. It was a curse that echoed through valleys and mountaintops alike. Let no land give Leto sanctuary. Let no soil soften beneath her feet. Let no cradle hold her unborn light. So Leto wandered. She walked on blistered feet beneath suns that did not pity her. She wept into streams that did not answer. She cradled her belly under olive trees that turned their branches away. Until Delos, not land, not truly, a drifting breath, an island outside of Hera's domain, because it was not yet claimed by earth nor sky. And so, tired and trembling, Leto fell to her knees on Delos' strange sand. And Delos, that silent sleeper, shuddered. It felt her pain, her exhaustion, her divinity, and for the first time in all its drifting existence, it chose. It allowed her to stay, to bleed, to birth. And oh, what a birth it was. First came Artemis, goddess of the hunt, moonlight in her veins, born silent and calm as dusk. She slid into the world like a sigh, a silver shadow, eyes wide and knowing. So pure was her nature, so strong her bond to her mother, that she turned, newborn and bloodless, and helped Leto birth her brother. And then came Apollo, but not quietly. He came with fire, with light, with prophecy curled into his tiny fists. He cried once, and the birds stopped. The sea froze, the olive trees bent, and the island, this strange floating creature that had never known weight, now held the unbearable gravity of gods. It is said that the sun rose differently that day, not from the east, but from Delos, from the mouth of the newborn god. Apollo, radiant with future and fury, would one day become the patron of logic, of music, of medicine. But in that moment, he was simply light, made flesh. Delos became the holy stage for this divine arrival, an island that birthed divinity, without altar, without midwife, without even a name, and it changed forever. The wind no longer moved it. The waves no longer tossed it. Poseidon's trident, some say, pinned it to the seabed, not with force, but with reverence, because Delos had become sacred, not through temples or declarations, but through pain and birth and divine need. It had cradled the beginning of something eternal. And perhaps that's why, even now, when you step onto its soil, you feel the hush, as if the island remembers, as if the sand is still warm from Leto's labor, as if the stones still echo with the cry of a god discovering his lungs. Delos is a cradle still, a cradle not for bodies, but for memory, a place where gods came not from fire or thunder, but from suffering, endurance, and quiet triumph. So tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, imagine that moment, a woman forgotten by the world, holding the future in her womb, kneeling on an island not meant to exist, and bringing forth light. And Delos, for the first time, stood still and became the center of everything. Not all land is meant to be walked. Some land is meant to be dreamed, and Delos was once both. Even after the birth of Artemis and Apollo, Delos remained fragile, suspended, the echo of a moment, a place where gods had been born, but where permanence had yet to settle. It still floated, not across the sea, but within uncertainty. The earth beneath it held no roots, no foundation. The rocks shifted like thoughts. The soil trembled with every tide. And the people, those who dared approach it, spoke of strange feelings when stepping ashore, as if they were trespassing in a memory not their own, as if the island might at any moment slip back into the mist. But prophecy changes everything. And on Delos, prophecy did not arrive with trumpet blasts or flashing skies. It came on the lips of those who saw more with their eyes closed than open, those who heard patterns in the wind and music in silence. They said, Delos must not drift, that the island, now touched by divine birth, must be anchored physically and cosmically, fixed in the world, so that memory would not dissolve into sea foam, so that the echo of gods might linger. And so they turned to Poseidon, not as a tempest, but as a craftsman, the god of earthquakes and oceans, with hands made of salt and storm, was summoned to root the island that had refused to belong. Imagine the moment. The sea is calm, but the depths groan. A stillness hangs in the air, as if the gods themselves hold their breath. Poseidon rises, not in fury, but in majesty, and in his hand, the trident gleams, not with war, but with purpose. He surveys Delos, this feather of an island, this sacred womb now floating just above its own shadow. And then he strikes. Down goes the trident, not in rage, but with the force of fate. Into the seabed it sinks, piercing through layers of sediment and ancient bone, finding at last the secret marrow of the earth. The sea rumbles, the sky flashes, not with lightning, but with memory, and slowly, Delos stops moving. It is said that a golden ring formed around the island at that moment, seen only by those with vision beyond sight. A halo of stillness, an invisible tether. Delos had been anchored, not just to the earth, but to destiny. From that moment on, Delos could not drift, could not forget, could not be hidden. It had become a fixed point in the turning wheel of the world, a compass of the divine, a stone set in the center of the Aegean, around which time and myth would revolve. But the anchoring came with consequence. What had once been light became heavy. What had once been untouched became sacred. No more wandering, no more mystery. Delos now belonged to gods, to worship, to prophecy. And with that weight came responsibility. Priests would build temples here, not just to honor Apollo, but to preserve the silence he was born into. Pilgrims would arrive, not just to pray, but to walk softly on the bones of myth. And Delos would hold them all, stone by stone, generation by generation, like a mother remembering every child who passed through her arms. But even then, beneath all the reverence, there was a whisper, a secret. The island still remembered the sea, still dreamed, sometimes, of floating, because being anchored is not the same as being free. Delos had accepted its fate. It had offered itself to the gods. But deep in the marrow of its marble, it still held the pulse of movement, of possibility. And that is perhaps the greatest tragedy of prophecy. Not that it tells us what must come, but that it tells us what can no longer be. Delos would never drift again, never vanish, never escape. It was now the center, but it had once been the edge. And that memory, like salt in the stone, remained. So tonight, as you rest deeper into silence, imagine that anchoring, the weight of purpose, the beauty of belonging, and the quiet ache of surrender. Delos is still here, rooted, wholly beautiful, but somewhere beneath its temples, beneath the lions, beneath the footsteps of 1,000 years, it still dreams of floating. They say there are places in the world where the sun does not simply rise. It awakens, where the first golden ray is not light but memory, a soft breath exhaled across centuries, warming ruins, dust, and dreams alike. Delos is one of those places, and to the ancients, it was more than an island. It was the navel of light itself. Here, they believed, light touched Earth for the very first time, not metaphorically, but truly, physically, deliberately. Each dawn that broke over the marble terraces of Delos was a reenactment of Apollo's arrival. Each morning, a cosmic ritual, the god of light reborn with the rising sun. Let me take you there now. The sky still sleeps, cloaked in ash-blue softness. The sea lies silent, a dark silk sheet stretched to the horizon. But then, subtle, slow, a seam of gold tears through the east. You stand among the stones. No one else is here. Only you and the lions in the sky. And then the first ray arrives. Not harsh, not sudden. It spills like honey over the broken temple columns, drips like melted amber along the marble paths, and finally rests, just so, on the altar of Apollo. The light does not simply illuminate. It recognizes. It remembers. Because Delos is not just any dawn-facing landmass. It is the birthplace of light itself. The place where Apollo first opened his eyes and saw the world. And perhaps where the world first saw itself. To the ancient Greeks, this was not poetic fancy. It was sacred geometry. Delos was aligned not only with the stars, but with the very breath of the cosmos. Every festival, every ritual, every step of worship was timed with the sun's arc. Every statue positioned to drink in the morning light. The whole island was designed like a lens to magnify the divine glow of Apollo. Even the stones here shimmered differently at dawn. Not white, but almost translucent, as if they remember being soft once. As if they remember when the sun itself was newborn and Delos was its crib. Pilgrims came here not simply to worship, but to witness the miracle of light's return, to see the way the sun touched the earth and said, "Begin again." Imagine standing in a crowd of thousands, all of you silent as the eastern sky opens. You've traveled for weeks, by cart, by ship, on foot, just to see the moment when the God of truth climbs the sky. And when he does, there is no cheering, no trumpet, just awe, the kind that silences even the boldest men, the kind that presses your heart into stillness, the kind that makes you believe, if only for a second, that everything is in its right place. This was Delos at dawn, not just beautiful, revealing, because Apollo was more than a sun god. He was the patron of knowledge, of prophecy, of reason. And here, where his light first bloomed, people came to ask questions they didn't dare voice elsewhere. Who am I? Why was I born? What must I do to be in harmony with the divine? They knelt not for answers, but for clarity, for the warmth of a light that could melt illusion. And Delos, anchored now, no longer drifting, gave them that space. A sanctuary not just for gods, but for thought, for vision, for truth. Even now, if you walk its quiet paths at first light, there's a sensation, not on your skin, but beneath it, a blooming, a rising. It's as if the light is not coming from the sky, but from the stones beneath your feet, as if Apollo never left, but lives in the marble itself. And as the golden sun stretches its fingers across columns and doorways, the island exhales. You can almost hear it, the sigh of something ancient, at peace for one more day. So sleep now, beneath this warm and endless light. Let it fill your chest. Let it smooth the worry lines from your brow. Because you are here, where light touched earth first. And here, all is understood. Before the hymns faded, before marble crumbled like pressed petals between pages, before Delos was a ruin, it was a song carved in stone, rising from the silence left behind by gods. After the birth of Apollo and Artemis, the island was no longer anonymous, no longer invisible. The winds carried word of it, not loud, but persistent. Sailors spoke of a sacred place, where the light warmed the soul, and the air smelled of olive wood and purpose. And so they came, first in handfuls, then in multitudes, priests, stonemasons, oracles, mothers with salt in their skirts, children clutching sun-bleached offerings. They arrived not with conquest in their eyes, but with reverence in their footsteps, and they built. But not as we build today, not for glory, not for dominion. They built to echo. They believed, you see, that sound mattered. That prayer, when spoken in the right space, could ripple into eternity. The first temples of Delos were born of that belief, hewn from native stone, placed with care upon the island's warm back. There were less buildings and more instruments. Their columns did not merely support weight. They carried breath. The architects listened to wind before laying foundation. They watched where morning light poured in most gently. They waited for the quiet hum of harmony between rock and sea. And only then, only when the silence was perfect, did they begin to build. The temple of Apollo rose first, not as a fortress, but as an invitation. It had no great gates, no defensive walls, just open courtyards, wide steps leading upward, and a single polished altar that gleamed like bone in the midday sun. And when one spoke within its walls, not shouted, but merely spoke, the words would circle upward, softly, as if carried by invisible wings. Some said the god himself listened. Others said the temple had memory, that it remembered every vow, every plea, every whisper of longing. Even now, centuries collapsed into rubble and time. You can still feel the presence. Walk into the remains of the sanctuary. Carefully, slowly, and close your eyes. Breathe. Wait. The wind will do the rest. It threads through the broken columns, slips across the fluted stone, and what emerges is not quite a voice, but the echo of one, a murmur, a shiver, an invitation to remember. And Delos had more than one temple. There were shrines for Artemis, cool and moonlit, their floors adorned with mosaics that shimmered like still water. There were altars for Leto, where women came to pray for safe births, kneeling on worn stone, with their bellies full of hope and fear. And there were sacred rooms, small, round, hidden, where oracles whispered in trance, their words half dream, half fire, listened to by trembling pilgrims who clutched their hearts, as if truth might break them. But none of it was extravagant. There was no gold, no thrones, no towering statues of hubris, because Delos was never about the god's image. It was about his presence, his sound, his warmth, his echo. And so the island pulsed with song, not the loud kind, but the deep kind, the kind you feel in your bones before you ever hear it in your ears. The temples rang with lyre strings at dawn, chanting at dusk, and in between, silence. The most sacred music of all. This rhythm, build, praise, hush, continued for generations. And even as marble cracked, as columns toppled like tired elders, as ivy crept into sacred spaces, the echoes remained. Because that's what a true temple is. Not stone, not structure, but resonance. And Delos, even now, even in ruin, still resonates. It does not need restoration. It needs only ears that know how to listen. So now, in the comfort of your bed, beneath the gentle pressure of night, let your breath slow. Let your body settle into stillness. And let the echoes reach you. The whispers of old stone. The murmurs of prayers never quite finished. The sound of gods. Remembering, you are not alone. The temple still stands in the dark. Not in body, but in spirit. Waiting, always, for the next soul brave enough to speak. And quiet enough to hear the answer. They still stand there. Dozens of them. Some shattered, some bowed. Some buried to the neck in sand and time. But still they watch. Carved from marble older than memory. They line the walkways. Fill the ruined courtyards. Guard the stairways where only wind passes now. They are faces. Human, divine in between. But none of them speak. They have no voices. Only eyes. Empty. Unseeing eyes that have stared into centuries of sun. Eyes that once saw gods being worshipped. Eyes that saw blood on altars. Flesh trembling with devotion. Flame flickering in sacred bowls. And then, nothing. Nothing but silence. Salt and time. They are everywhere on Delos. Busts with broken noses. Statues missing limbs or heads. Torso upon torso. As if the island itself could not bear to forget the human form, but could no longer remember the details. Who were they? Some wore wreaths of laurel, their mouths curled in confident serenity. Priests, perhaps. Poets. Rulers whose names meant something once. Others were women draped in stone that still folds like real linen. Goddesses? Or mothers lost to history. And then there are the children. Small figures with chubby arms, toes curled into the earth, eyes wide with marble innocence, eternally young, eternally waiting. Most of their names are gone, erased by wind, rain, and centuries of indifference. Inscriptions fade, but faces remain. There's something about a carved face, isn't there, it lingers. It holds a shadow of breath, the idea of a voice. Even when both are long lost, on Delos, the marble faces speak in silence. You walk among them not as a tourist, but as a listener, because sometimes, late at night, when the stars press low and the moon casts shadows sharp enough to hurt, the statues seem to whisper, not in words, but in presence. They turn toward you, barely, just enough to catch the edge of your knowing, and they ask something, not with lips, but with emptiness. They ask, do you remember us? Do you know what we gave, what we carried, what we became? And you won't have an answer, because these faces are not meant to be known. They are meant to be felt. Walk deeper. There's a courtyard, half swallowed by earth. Thistle and wild sage bloom through cracked stone. In its center, a statue taller than most. She has no arms. Her chin is gone, but her posture, it is regal, unyielding. This was once someone's offering, a prayer made solid. Perhaps she was meant to honor Artemis. Perhaps she was Artemis. Or perhaps she was simply a woman, remembered once, forgotten now. Immortalized, not in words, but in marble. There is something beautiful in this forgetting. Not cruel, not tragic, just natural, as if the gods, too, surrender their memories to time, knowing that what truly matters isn't the name, but the gesture, the carving, the stillness, the willingness to be seen by those yet to come. And now here you are, centuries later, standing in the quiet dark, breathing beside their cold permanence. You do not know them, but they know you, because you are what they waited for. The future, the question, the dream still dreaming. So rest among them. Let your breath slow as theirs once did. Let your bones soften like the weathered marble around you. Let the weight of history press against you. Not heavy, but anchoring. And as you sleep, know this. The faces are watching still. Not to haunt you, not to beg, but to remind you that to be forgotten is not to be lost. Delos remembers them. And now, so do you. They stand in a line, poised as if frozen mid-step. Backs arched, heads lifted, mouths parted in a silent roar that was never meant to be heard. The lions of Delos. There were once many of them, dozens some say. Now only a few remain. Their white marble bodies, eroded by wind and salt, stare eternally east. Toward the sunrise, they were carved to greet. To walk among them is to step into a dream that has calcified. A procession of stone beasts along a sacred path. Watching, waiting, but for what, no one knows anymore. They are not lions as nature made them. Their shapes are stylized, almost otherworldly. Muscular, elongated, nearly serpentine in posture, as if caught between the real and the divine. Some say they were guardians, placed there to protect the sanctuary of Apollo. Others claim they were offerings, votive sculptures gifted by the people of Naxos to honor the god of light and prophecy, a tribute of power, strength, and vigilance. But there is something deeper in their stillness. It is not just protection. It is not just reverence. It is grief. Because when you stand before them, when the wind moves just right, and the cicadas quiet, and your shadow aligns with theirs, you feel it, the ache, the longing, as if these lions remember something that was lost, as if they are not roaring, but mourning. Their blank eyes do not judge. They endure. They have endured for more than 2,000 years. Storms, invasions, earthquakes, silence. They have no temples of their own, no shrine, no altar, and yet they remain, loyal, patient, facing always toward the place where the sun is reborn each day. What did they see? They saw priests pass in linen robes, carrying bowls of fire. They saw pilgrims laying garlands at Apollo's altar, tears drying on sunburned cheeks. They saw ships arriving by starlight and leaving by flame. They saw the rise of Delos, its glory, its festivals, its sacredness, and they saw its fall. They stood unmoving as columns cracked and temples collapsed, as ivy climbed what once gleamed white, as voices ceased and footsteps vanished. And still, they stayed, even when the marble beneath them split, even when others were moved to museums, far from the sea and sky, even when their brothers, those first lions, were lost to theft, time, or decay. The few that remained stand as the last sentinels, weathered, worn, silent. There is something profoundly human about their posture, as if they're not merely lions, but souls made visible, souls who choose to stay, even when no one is watching, even when all is gone. They speak to a part of us we often forget, the part that understands devotion, not as noise, but as stillness, as presence. Tonight, you walk among them. You don't need to speak. You don't need to understand every story they witnessed. You only need to be still. Pause between two of them. Feel the gravel beneath your feet, the soft pressure of time settling on your shoulders. Breathe in the air they've breathed for centuries. Salt heavy, sun warmed, laced with the memory of incense and ash. And as you look toward the horizon they face, you realize they are not waiting for the past to return. They are waiting for you. Not just you, this you lying here in darkness listening, but the you that remembers silence. The you that kneels before beauty without needing to name it. The you that still believes the sun can rise inside the soul. Because that's what these lions guard. Not a god, not a temple, but the sunrise itself. The promise of return, of renewal, of light after silence. So rest now. Breathe as they breathe, slow, open, ageless. You are part of their silent parade. And somewhere beyond the edge of sleep, the first gold of morning is beginning to gather on their backs. They do not roar. They wait. And in that waiting, they remind the world that what is sacred endures. Delos was not like other places. It did not belong to kings or to armies or even to men. It belonged to light. And in such a place, the laws were not made of parchment or politics. They were made of presence. They call them sacred laws, but they were more than rules. They were whispers, boundaries drawn not by force, but by reverence. When Delos became the birthplace of Apollo, the island entered into a pact, not with men, but with the divine order of the cosmos. And that pact began with a paradox. No one could be born on Delos, and no one could die. Yes, you heard that right. No birth, no death, no life's beginning, no life's end. Because to be sacred, Delos had to exist outside the human cycle. Outside decay, outside blood, outside the cries of newborn lungs or the final exhale of the dying. To preserve the sanctity of Apollo's arrival, Delos was consecrated as a place untouched by the full weight of mortality. This was not superstition. It was devotion distilled into law. So, if a woman came close to labor, she was taken away, gently, respectfully, to a neighboring island where life could begin properly. And if a man felt his bones begin to loosen with the nearness of death, he too was ferried elsewhere, to let go in a place more fitting for endings. The island would not hold life's edges, only its center, and so Delos became a place of pause, a suspended breath, a sanctuary where time moved differently. Not forward, not backward, but inward. Imagine that for a moment. An entire island where no one is born and no one dies. An island where every step is a continuation, not a beginning or an end. A space between thresholds, a mirror held up to the human soul, free of its most earthly fears. It gave people a kind of weightlessness, not the weightlessness of joy, but of reverence. Visitors treaded lightly, voices lowered. Even the birds, they say, sang more softly there. And in that silence, commerce still happened. Festivals were held, poems recited, philosophers walked and debated, but all of it within the rules of the sun. Because Apollo, the god who had made Delos sacred, was not a god of chaos. He was the god of order, of music, medicine, mathematics, the god of clarity, of light that revealed rather than blinded. And so his island reflected his essence. Nothing wild, nothing cruel, only form, rhythm, stillness. There were no wild feasts of Dionysus here, no shadowy rites to chthonic deities. Delos belonged to the daylight, to balance, to precision. Even the temples were designed with geometry in mind. Everything aligned with the stars, with the angles of light, with the long rhythm of the seasons. Pilgrims would arrive with offerings, yes, but also with questions. Not questions of fate, but of self. Who am I? What must I understand? What is my place in the symphony of the world? And under the sacred laws, the island answered, not in words, but in how it held them. It held them between life and death, between sun and shadow, between the past they carried and the future they could not yet see. Delos asked nothing of them but presence, to simply be, to walk, to observe, to listen, and in return, it offered them something the world so rarely gives. A pause, not to escape life, but to understand it. And now, centuries later, long after the last law was enforced, you still feel it. When you set foot on Delos, something shifts. Your thoughts quiet. Your breath slows. You feel the echo of boundaries you cannot see, but which your body recognizes. You're no longer in a place. You are in a pause, a moment of stillness that exists for its own sake. And in that stillness, you are free. So rest now, under that same sun. Let warm your chest, not to burn, but to bless. Let the sacred laws carry you into sleep. Not rules, but rhythms. And remember, on Delos, you were never born, and you will never die. You only exist, quietly, fully, like a beam of sunlight between shadows. The Aegean wind is older than history. It has carried ships, stories, and silent longing from shore to shore for millennia. And on certain mornings, when the sky was clean and the sea as smooth as hammered bronze, you could see them, the sails, soft and white, like stretched linen pulled from the loom of fate, fluttering as they approached the island that did not belong to time. They were pilgrims, not in the way we often imagine them, not just cloaked in piety or bowed in sorrow. These were merchants, fishermen, mothers with salt-chapped hands, soldiers tired of war, young poets in search of truth, old men in search of memory, and children, wide-eyed, restless, carried in woven slings or on broad shoulders, already half dreaming of gods. They came to Delos as one comes to water in a dry place, not simply to look, but to be changed. There was no single road to Delos. The Cyclades offered 100 winding paths, from Naxos and Paros, from Athens and Crete, but all paths ended the same way, with a small wooden boat, cutting quietly toward a shimmer on the horizon. Delos never welcomed you with trumpets. It didn't need to. Its silence was its summons, its stillness a doorway, and the pilgrims, each one carrying questions like stones tucked into the folds of their garments, stepped ashore with hearts trembling just slightly more than their hands. The journey did not end at the dock. It began there, because the path, the true path, was not paved in marble. It was walked in wonder. They would ascend the sacred way, a gentle climb from sea to sanctuary, stone steps worn by generations of bare feet and hopeful offerings. Along the path, Inscriptions faded to ghosts. Columns toppled sideways like weary elders, and offerings left behind. Bits of pottery, coins, fragments of song. Each step, a heartbeat. Each breath, a silent prayer. Some pilgrims sang, low hymns to Apollo, their voices more breath than tone, rising and falling like waves. Others said nothing, but let their silence speak. And some wept, for reasons even they couldn't name. Because sometimes the body knows what the mind cannot yet say, that it is in the presence of something ancient and holy. Not religious, perhaps, but essential. There was a rhythm to the path, a sacred slowness. You didn't hurry on Delos, not because someone told you not to, but because the land itself asked you, gently, wordlessly, to linger, to let your hand glide across the stone walls, still warm from the morning sun, to pause at a spring and hear water echo in a way that made you feel small and infinite all at once. And when you finally reached this sanctuary, when the temples rose before you in their sun-bleached glory, and the lions stood with their mouths open to eternity, and the incense of centuries clung to the breeze, you did not speak. You listened, because the true path was not made of steps. It was made of noticing how the light changed the marble, how the wind carried the faint taste of salt and time, how time didn't pass here. It circled. Pilgrims brought offerings, some grand, statues, treasure, carved dedications. Others simple, an olive branch, a lock of hair, a single whispered name. And some brought nothing at all, but their presence, which on Delos was enough. No priest demanded it, no law enforced it, but every soul who arrived understood. You did not come to Delos to be seen. You came to see, to stand still, to breathe slowly, to remember what it feels like to be part of something that has no beginning and no end. And then, when a moment passed, they would turn. They would descend the path. Hearts quieted. Minds not full, but somehow emptied. Lighter. The sea would greet them again. Boats bobbing gently like waiting thoughts. And they would return home. But home would feel different. Because once you have walked the path to Delos, once you have stood on ground that refused to be born or die, you carry something within you. A rhythm, a silence, a golden stillness, folded somewhere beneath your ribs. And tonight, as you rest beneath your own roof, beneath your own stars, you too have walked the path. You too have arrived, not at a destination, but at yourself. So let sleep find you now, slowly, like a sail drifting toward harbor, like a footfall on warm stone, and let the pilgrim's path continue. Within, the truth, they say, does not shout. It waits. It waits in quiet corners, in dreams half-remembered, in wind that smells of crushed herbs and distant rain. On Delos, truth was never written. It was spoken, but not in the way you and I speak. It was breathed, offered like vapor from the lips of those who did not sleep as the rest of us do. The oracles, they were not prophets in the way we imagine, not cloaked in glittering robes, not wide-eyed and wild with visions. They were quiet, still, often women, young, old, in between, chosen not for beauty or brilliance, but for their listening. That's what defined an oracle. Not what she could see, but what she could hear. And on Delos, they listened not in temples, but in groves, sacred groves of olive trees. You must understand, the olive was no ordinary plant in ancient Greece. It was life, bread, oil, light. It grew where little else would. Its silver-green leaves shivered in the wind like prayers. Its twisted trunks recording time like silent scrolls of bark and bone. In the shaded hush of these groves, the oracles would sit, their backs to the tree, their eyes closed, their hands resting on the warm earth, and they would wait. not for gods to appear in flashes of thunder, but for patterns in the rustle of leaves, for meaning in the way the cicadas paused, for messages riding the breath of the wind. Some say Apollo whispered directly to them. Others say the island itself spoke through them, its marble bones aching with truths too old to carry alone. People would approach softly, offering tokens, bread, figs, ribbons of blue linen. They knelt, not with demands, but with questions wrapped in trembling hope. Will I find love? Will my son return from sea? Should I plant barley or grapes this year? Is the illness in my chest a punishment or a path? And the oracle would respond, not with certainty, but with rhythm. She might speak in riddles, or she might say nothing at all, only pluck a leaf and let it fall. And somehow, in that falling, you would know your answer, because the oracles of Delos were not there to predict. They were there to reveal, and not the future, but you, the part of you that already knew, but could not yet name. Even today, if you find one of those ancient groves, and there are still a few, growing wild at the island's edge, you can feel it. The air thickens. The light softens to a golden hush. The wind forgets to be wind and becomes something older, like breath before speech. You sit, you close your eyes, and you wait, and the rustle of the leaves is not just leaves. It's the sound of the question forming, and the answer waiting to be received. No writing, no fire, just earth and voice and breath. And when the oracle stood to leave, she would press one hand to the tree and one hand to her heart, a simple gesture, but one that meant, I have spoken what needed to be spoken, and I leave the rest to silence, because not all truths need to be heard. Some only need to be held. So tonight, as the world quiets around you, imagine yourself there, beneath the olive branches, the light filtering through like lace, the scent of sap and soil in your lungs. There is no rush, no pressure to decide, only the slow circling of a thought. Coming home, you are the pilgrim, you are the listener, and somewhere deep within, your own oracle waits, not to speak, but to remind you of what you already carry. Let the wind speak now. Let the leaves fall. Let the question find you. And let sleep answer. Once a year, Delos remembered how it had once floated, not in myth, not in silence, but in celebration. And the sea, that patient old witness, became a mirror again, reflecting gods and humans alike, in a festival that shimmered like gold over water. It was called the Delia, not just a gathering, not just a ceremony, but a rebirth, a memory turned ritual, a sacred reenactment of arrival, honoring the day Apollo was born, and the day light found a home in the world. And at the heart of it all was the golden boat. They built it with reverence each year, a small sacred vessel, its hull polished like sunlit honey, its edges wrapped in ribbons and olive garlands. Some say it bore no passengers, only offerings. Others say it was meant to carry the gods, Apollo and Artemis themselves, if they chose to visit. It set sail from Athens, escorted by songs, by drums, by silence. The Athenians, proud and pious, would wait for a sign from the oracle at Delphi, a moment when the stars and winds aligned, and only then would they launch the Theris, the sacred ship, toward Delos. It was not a fast journey. It was not meant to be. This was a pilgrimage across the water, not of distance, but of depth. Along the way, the boat gathered prayers like dew, whispers sent over the waves by fishermen, children, priests with sunburnt foreheads and salt beneath their nails. And as the ship neared Delos, the island prepared. Temples were washed. Statues were adorned with new wreaths. Torches were lit in unison, flickering like stars brought down to earth. And when the golden boat finally entered the harbor, The people did not cheer. They sang low, rhythmic hymns, melodies passed down through generations, older than memory, new each time they were sung. The boat was drawn ashore by robed attendants, its prow kissed by the sand, and then began the Delian festival. Days of music, athletic contests, sacrifices, theater, dance, but not frenzy, not excess. This was not Dionysus's feast. This was Apollo's. It moved with grace, with order, with harmony. Children sang paeans under columns strung with ivy. Dancers in white stepped barefoot across marble floors, worn smooth by centuries of sacred feet. And philosophers stood beneath laurel trees, debating the shape of virtue, while the scent of roasted figs and honeyed bread warmed the air. The entire island became an instrument, a lyre played by light, each moment a plucked string, each breath a note of praise. And through it all, the golden boat remained in view, resting on its bed of sand, gleaming beneath the sun, like a memory made solid. It was not merely a symbol. It was a bridge between Athens and Delos, between mortals and gods, between the past that never truly ended and the future quietly waiting to be shaped. They say that in the quiet hours, when the crowds had wandered to feast or sleep, some would sit alone beside the boat, not to worship, but to wonder. They would ask questions no priest could answer. Did Apollo truly walk here once? Did his feet touch this sand? Does the sun still follow the rhythm of his breath? And if so, what does he see now? When he looks down, the boat never answered, but silence was kind. It held all questions without judgment. And in its stillness, some found peace, because that's what the Delia gave. Not just spectacle, but belonging. To take part in it, even once, was to become part of something older than fear, older than doubt. It was to be folded gently into the fabric of myth, as one might be wrapped in a warm cloak on a cool morning. And even centuries later, though the golden boat no longer sails, though the priests no longer sing, the harbor remembers. Stand there at sunrise, and the sea still shines gold. Close your eyes, and you might hear music just below the waves. So tonight, as your thoughts drift like oars across dark water, let the golden boat carry you, not to a place, but to a feeling. Let it bring you to the quiet part of yourself, the part that still believes in arrival, in renewal, in light born from silence. Let it drift, let it gleam, let it rest beside your dreams. And know this, the gods may come and go, but the festival of your soul, the quiet celebration of who you are, still floats, and it is beautiful. There's a moment in every story, too quiet to mark with ink, when presence becomes absence, not suddenly, not like thunder, but slowly, like twilight seeping into a room through a half-open door. This is how the gods left Delos. Not in fury, not in flame, but in silence. No one noticed at first. The festivals continued. The hymns were sung. Offerings were made with trembling hands. But something had shifted. A missed note in a familiar song. A pause too long between rituals. A wind that no longer smelled of laurel, but of dust. And then the questions began. Why did the oracles speak less clearly? Why did the olive groves fall quiet? Why did the sun still rise, but no longer feel like a blessing? Some say the gods turned their gaze elsewhere. That newer cities, rising with gold and ambition, caught their attention. That Delos, still sacred, had become too small. Others whisper a darker tale, that the island grew too proud, that the purity of Apollo's law, no birth, no death, had become brittle, obsessive. That Delos tried too hard to be eternal, and in doing so, lost the one thing gods require: humility. But perhaps it wasn't pride. Perhaps it was simply time. Time, which even sacred marble cannot ignore. Time, which even the gods must bend to, if only to let the world change. And the world did change. Trade grew. Empires shifted. Athens waned. Rome stirred. And Delos, once the navel of the Aegean, became a port, a market, a place of exchange. Still holy, still beautiful, but somehow hollow. The golden boat sailed fewer times. Pilgrims arrived with more coin and less faith. The sacred way echoed with footsteps that walked quickly, not reverently. And the lions? They watched, as they always had. But now, they watched as offerings turned into transactions. You could feel it in the temples, the way sunlight struck the stone, but didn't seem to warm it, as if the light itself missed someone. Some say the last oracle refused to speak, that she sat beneath the oldest olive tree for 7 days, and said nothing, not in protest, but in mourning. Because how do you speak the will of gods, who no longer whisper? And so the island stilled, not in peace, but in pause. The priests grew old, the statues gathered moss, and one morning the sun rose over Delos, and no one greeted it. No hymn, no flute, only waves, and the tired cry of a seabird circling a harbor grown quiet. But here is the truth the world forgot. The gods did not leave in anger. They simply let go, because Delos had always been a place between earth and sky, between birth and death, between memory and myth. And when the world chose to move forward, Delos remained, still, gentle, unmoving, not abandoned, but left behind like a beloved book, placed carefully on a shelf, its pages still warm with meaning, waiting for someone to open them again. And tonight, you have opened one. You are here, walking among the ruins that once sang, breathing the same salt-sweet air, stepping softly in the footsteps of pilgrims, who once believed that every stone on this island had a soul. And maybe they were right, because Delos remembers, not with grief, but with grace. It does not cry out for the gods to return. It holds the memory of their presence, like a candle that no longer burns, but still smells faintly of smoke. So rest now in this pause, not in sorrow, but in stillness, because even when the gods look away, the silence they leave behind is its own kind of holiness. Not all invasions come with swords. Some arrive in silence, with sandals caked in dust, with ledgers under the arm, with intentions not of conquest, but of efficiency. That's how Delos was changed. Not destroyed, not burned, but flattened. The gods had already begun to retreat, their whispers thinner each year. The last true hymns had grown quiet, and the olive trees no longer rustled with the weight of prophecy. And into that silence, Rome came, not violently, not at first. They came with the scent of order, of coin, of control. Delos was sacred, yes, but it was also well-placed. A perfect jewel in the Aegean, surrounded by the growing trade routes of an empire that believed, not in temples, but in taxes. And so they redefined it. They didn't topple the statues. They didn't torch the temples. They repurposed them. Altars became platforms for transactions. Temple courtyards hosted auctions. The columns that once echoed with poetry now rang with shouted prices. Marble steps that had known the careful feet of pilgrims felt the stampede of commerce. The clinking of coins replaced the rustle of robes. And prayers? They were traded for contracts. It didn't happen all at once. Decay is never abrupt. It's gradual, like rot hidden beneath polished fruit, like sunlight slowly losing its warmth. At first, the changes seemed harmless. A few houses built too close to the sacred grove. A few traders setting up stalls beneath the lions. then storage rooms beside the oracle's path, then slave markets. Yes, here on Delos, the island where no one could be born or die, now pulsed with the footsteps of the bought and the broken. Ships arrived by the dozens, not with gold offerings, but with bodies, men, women, children, sold, inspected, branded. Here, beneath the gaze of Apollo, or perhaps beneath the memory of his gaze. Because by then, the god had gone. The sanctity of silence had been filled with noise. Noise that never stopped. Hammers, chains, laughter that rang too loud. The rough voice of merchants shouting for deals. There was no more space for reverence. No room for stillness. Only motion. Only gain. And so little by little, Delos was forgotten not as sacred, but as special. It became useful. And when something sacred becomes useful, it begins to disappear in plain sight. They built stone houses into the flanks of hills that once cradled shrines. They dismantled parts of temples to reuse the marble. Statues were dragged from sanctuaries and repurposed as fountains. Faces once carved in devotion now spouted water into public baths. And still, the island said nothing. It did not crumble in protest. It did not split open with divine fury. It simply watched, as all sacred things do, as all things built with love must eventually, because the true tragedy is not destruction. It's indifference. Not that people feared the gods, but that they forgot them. And yet, not all was lost. There were still shadows. Still places on Delos where the wind did not carry the smell of wine or sweat, but the ghost of incense. Still corners of the island that refused to be paved. Still columns that stood, cracked but unbowed, watching with marble eyes. And sometimes, at dawn, before the market awoke, before the voices rose, a merchant would pause beside the lions. He wouldn't know why. He'd just stop, stand still, look out toward the sea, and something quiet, wordless, would stir in his chest. A flicker, a warmth, not of memory, but of recognition. The sacred does not need to be remembered. It only needs to be felt. And Delos, though invaded by the ordinary, still carried the hum of something more. Even under marble reused for counting tables. Even beneath soil trampled by sandals of soldiers and slaves. Even in the corners turned to shadow. The island waited, because one day the noise would stop, the crowds would vanish, and all that would remain would be the silence. And in that silence, the gods would return, not to rule, but to rest. And so will you. Tonight, as the world outside your window fades, you lie here listening to the quiet, beneath the noise of your thoughts, and Delos whispers to you, not with power, not with glory, but with presence. Even when the ordinary invades your sacredness, there's a part of you, still waiting, still whole, still yours, and that part is the island. Every city has a heartbeat. For Delos, in its sacred youth, that heartbeat was the temple. But as centuries passed and reverence thinned, a new rhythm emerged. Not divine, not silent, but human, loud, erratic, urgent. The rhythm of coin, of footsteps, of deals struck in shadows and shouted across sunlit stone. This was the agora, the marketplace, and it came to define Delos, as surely as the lions once had. It stretched across the island's center like a wound, stitched with stalls and lined with dust. Not built all at once, but grown over time, like ivy on the side of a house that has been abandoned by its owner. Here, marble slabs were repurposed. Pedestals of forgotten gods became platforms for goods. Sacred courtyards turned into storage yards. And the people came, not to worship, but to trade. From every direction they arrived. Phoenician merchants with beards like curled smoke. Egyptian traders wrapped in linen. Romans in crimson, Greeks in tunics stained with sea salt, languages tangled in the air, a chorus of desire, spices from the east, wool from the north, amphorae of oil, heavy with the scent of sun-drenched groves, perfumes, feathers, ivory, silk, and more, things less spoken of, flesh, names, children, because Delos, despite its sacred bones, had become one of the largest slave markets in the known world. Thousands arrived here not as pilgrims, but as property. Their names were recorded briefly, scribbled in ink that washed away with the first rain. And when they were sold, those names were forgotten entirely. A girl from Illyria, 13 winters old. A boy from Cyprus who once carved bird from driftwood. A mother who hummed lullabies in a language no longer remembered. Gone, erased, absorbed by the appetite of commerce. But the marble remembers. It holds their footsteps, their shadows, their breath. If you walk the marketplace today, when the air is still and the sun leans low, you can almost hear it. Not the shouting, not the trade, but the silence between transactions. The hollow pause when a soul crosses from freedom to ownership. A silence heavier than stone. And yet, not all was lost. There are still moments, small, trembling, easily missed, when something sacred stirred. A merchant paused to tie a ribbon to a lion statue. A prayer for luck, perhaps, or forgiveness. A child dipped her fingers into the old temple fountain, giggling at the coolness, unaware that gods once drank from the same stream. A young man, tasked with sweeping the dust from the market square, looked up from his broom and caught the sunrise between two crumbling columns. And for a breath, just one, he felt something rise in his chest. He did not name it, but he remembered it for the rest of his life. Because Delos, even as it wore the mask of trade and toil, never fully surrendered its soul. The names may have been forgotten, but the presence never left. In the cracks of the agora's stones, tiny wildflowers grow, purple, stubborn, fragrant. Between the stalls where slaves once stood, the wind still carries the scent of olive wood and sea salt. Not bitter, but eternal. Even now, centuries gone, when you walk those same paths, your shoes modern, your thoughts distant, you feel it, the heaviness of what was taken, and the softness of what remains. Because names are easy to forget, but presence is not. Tonight, as you lie still in your quiet room, close your eyes and listen. Hear the distant murmur of that marketplace. Not loud now, but low, like thunder in a dream. Feel the stone beneath your feet, not polished, worn, smoothed by the weight of thousands of untold stories. Yours included. You are walking among the forgotten, but you have not forgotten. You carry their silence now, and you honor it, in breath, in sleep, in the way you listen for meaning, even in the quietest corners. The marketplace is no longer filled with voices, but it is full, with memory, with echoes, with names you may never know, but which still live, in the stones of Delos. There is a silence unlike any other, not the hush of night, not the stillness of prayer, but the silence that comes when death is not allowed to enter. Delos held such a silence, a sacred boundary, soft as breath, firm as marble. It was an island consecrated not only by myth, but by prohibition, a land so pure in the eyes of the ancients that it was said to be incompatible with death itself. No one could be born here, and no one could die. It was more than law. It was ritual truth, woven into the spiritual DNA of the place, even in its busiest days, when ships crowded the harbor and market calls echoed across the hills. This law endured, unchallenged, unbroken, absolute. Birth and death, the bookends of human existence. Removed, lifted, Delos became the middle, the eternal between. A sliver of eternity lodged within time. A breath that never ended. A note that never resolved. But how do you maintain such purity in a world that bleeds? The answer was exile. If a woman's labor pains began to seize her belly, she was carried swiftly from the island, not cruelly, but with urgency that bordered on reverence, as if Delos itself would recoil from the first cry of an infant. Likewise, if a man's face began to pale, his limbs grew cold, his breath rasped against the veil of mortality, he, too, was ferried across the waves, to die elsewhere, anywhere but here. Even the dead already buried on Delos, those interred long before the decree, were not spared. They were exhumed, moved, laid again in foreign soil, so that Delos might be cleansed of endings. Why? Because Apollo had been born here. And for the Greeks, birth and death were not just events. They were spiritual energies. To allow death to take root on Delos was to darken the very altar of light. Apollo was the god of harmony, medicine, music, but also of balance, to preserve the island's balance, its role as cradle of becoming. The taint of impermanence had to be cast away, and so Delos became a paradox, a sacred place where no child would ever cry out its first breath, where no soul would exhale its last, a temple shaped like an island, a land immune to death. But death does not forget. It waits. It does not rage, but it remembers. And as Delos flourished as a trade center, as voices replaced prayers, as coins replaced offerings, the question hovered, quiet, unseen. Could such purity last? You see, to live fully in the world is to live with birth and with death. And when you refuse them both, you do not become immortal. You become unrooted. And perhaps that was the true fate of Delos. Not destruction, not desecration, but disconnection. A place too holy to hold the weight of human passage. An island slowly drifting, not across water, but across meaning. Still beautiful, still bathed in sun, but somehow empty. Even now, when you walk the ruins, you feel it, the strange stillness. Not just of time, but of absence. There are no tombs, no gravestones, no cradles, no lullabies or elegies. Just marble, and wind, and memory that cannot rest. Because when a place forbids death, it also forbids closure. And so the island waits, forever paused between heartbeat and silence. But perhaps, tonight, we can offer it something more gentle. A kind of reverence that isn't bound by ancient laws. A whisper that honors what was kept away. So close your eyes now, and let go. Let the sleep come, as softly as the tide brushing forgotten shorelines. Let it carry with it the echoes of all those who could not stay, who left before the end, who were never allowed to end here. You carry them now in your breath, in your stillness, in the simple fact that you are here listening. And that too is sacred, not untouched by death, but touched so deeply by life that you honor both. Delos could not hold death, but tonight it holds you. There are places where light cannot reach. Even on Delos, island of the sun, birthplace of the divine flame, there are shadows that have never known morning. Not in the sky, but beneath the altars, beneath the crumbling columns, beneath the marble walkways worn thin by barefoot reverence, below the visible world, where the hush grows thicker, not darker, but older. Here live the things we do not speak of, not because they are evil, but because they are too heavy for daylight. The ancients knew this. They knew that what stands above, bright, proud, radiant, rests upon something unseen, something softer, something deeper. The gods walked in temples, yes, but their dreams, their wounds, their hungers lived underground. Delos, in all its sacredness, was no exception. Beneath the foundations of Apollo's great sanctuary, there were rooms, vaults, chambers carved into rock. Not grand, not gilded, but intimate. Low ceilings, smooth stone, breath-thick air. Storage for relics, yes, but also for secrets. Scrolls tucked away in urns sealed with wax. Bones, human and not, wrapped in linen. Offerings too personal, too powerful to place in open view. These were not offerings of display. They were confessions. A lock of hair tied with a string of tears. A shard of broken lyre, left in grief by someone who had lost their voice. A small clay figurine with one eye missing. Its tiny hands clutching nothing, as if it had already let go of what it once loved. They were placed in the shadows, where they could be held without being seen. Because shadow is not the absence of light. It is the presence of memory, of depth, and in the dark beneath the marble. Delos remembered things the daylight was too young to bear. Fear, longing, failure, faith too fragile to be named aloud. And the voices that visited these chambers? Not many, but those who did. They entered barefoot, carrying no torches, only the warmth of their breath to light the way. They walked slowly, as if each step carried the weight of generations. They did not ask for miracles. They asked to be seen, even in silence, even in darkness, because that is the great longing of the soul, not to shine, but to be held, exactly as it is. And Delos, in its silent rooms below the surface, offered that embrace, without judgment, without demand, only presence. Even now, when archaeologists descend into these spaces, they speak of the change in temperature, a sudden coolness, the air thick with something they cannot describe. It is not fear, it is not awe, it is recognition, as if the island knows you are there, as if the marble itself remembers what it once protected. Tonight, as you rest, imagine walking down one of those narrow stairways, stone beneath your feet, the scent of ancient dust and olive oil in the air. No sound but your breath, and maybe, just maybe, the faint echo of someone who once stood in the same place. Heart full of sorrow, hands full of nothing, but still here, still reaching, still hoping, because beneath every temple, there is a shadow, and in that shadow, something waits, not to frighten, but to listen. So go there now, in your mind, in your breath. You carry nothing. You need carry nothing. Delos has room for all that you do not name. Let the marble above you be your roof. Let the silence be your blanket. Let the shadow be not your fear, but your healing, because the light will rise again. It always does. But tonight, let rest, let sleep, with you, beneath the marble. There is a light that does not shine. It lingers, like breath on glass, like the golden rim left behind after the sun slips below the sea. That was the light of Apollo. In the final days on Delos, it did not vanish. It withdrew, as a tide does, as a god does, when the world forgets how to listen. For centuries, he had been everything here. The reason the island stood still, the voice in the wind, the fire in the veins of the faithful, the breath behind every flute, every offering, every dawn. Apollo, the radiant, the rational, the archer of clarity, had made Delos his sacred home, and for a long time it was enough. But light is not a possession. It is a presence, and when ignored, it does not rage. It recedes. The signs were small at first. A festival missed, a temple door left unopened, a hymn sung slightly out of tune. The lions, once draped with garlands, stood bare. The sacred way grew cracked, not from age, but from inattention. And Apollo, he watched, not from a throne, but from the silence between sunrises. He was a god of order, of measure. He would not beg for worship. Instead, He began to withdraw his presence, like a musician setting down his lyre, in the middle of a room that no longer listens. The Delian League dissolved. The gold that once funded rituals now funded wars. Temples were plundered, statues carted off to far cities, and the light dimmed, but not in bitterness. Apollo is not a god of vengeance. He's a god of grace, and in his grace, he left behind a final offering, a silence so perfect it could be mistaken for peace. Those who visited Delos in its twilight years often wrote of the strangeness of a light, how the sunrise came, but cast no warmth, how the shadows fell longer than they should, how at midday there seemed to be a faint echo, not sound, but sensation, as if the sun itself remembered being sung to. Because even when gods leave, they leave a shape, an outline, a warmth in the stone, a stillness that does not belong to this world. And on Delos, the last light of Apollo became just that. Not an event, a presence. It lingers still, in the way the marble glows at dusk, in the whisper of wind between columns, in the hush that falls when you step into a ruin and feel something watching, not with eyes, but with memory. Perhaps Apollo did not leave entirely. Perhaps no god ever does. Perhaps, like light, he scattered, became part of the island, part of its rhythm, its breath, its stillness. Some say that at dawn, if you place your hand on the eastern wall of the great sanctuary, the one where the light used to strike first, you will feel it, a pulse, faint, steady, not a heartbeat, but something older, the memory of devotion, the imprint of divinity. Because gods, you see, are not eternal because they are powerful. They are eternal because we remember how they felt. Apollo felt like mourning, like knowing, like music you couldn't quite hum, but carried anyway in your chest. And on Delos, he is still felt, not seen, not spoken, but felt, a hush, a warmth, a golden line drawn between what was and what still lingers. So rest now, in that last light. Let it fall over you like the end of a long day. Not cold, not sorrowful, but full. Let the warmth that once filled temples now fill your chest. Let the silence that replaced songs become your lullaby. Let the light of Apollo, his last light, be not an ending, but a blessing, because it never truly left, and neither have you. Centuries passed. The sea kept moving. The wind kept whispering. But Delos stayed still, not asleep, but waiting. A sacred stillness settled like dust across her bones. Temples cracked open to the sky. Altars swallowed by time. Statues watched the waves with blank eyes, their mouths softened by rain and forgetting. The island became a myth, a name on yellowed maps, a murmur in the margins of ancient books, until they came, not worshippers, not pilgrims, not kings or poets. They came with brushes, chisels, journals bound in leather. They came with questions, not of gods, but of time. They were archaeologists, and where others saw ruins, they saw sentences. Where others saw rubble, they saw rhythm. The dream of time, unfolding, unraveling, and Delos was their scripture. They arrived slowly at first. Scholars from France, from Britain, from nations that no longer believed in gods, but still believed in meaning. They set up camps near the harbor. They cleared brush with hands rough from study, not labor. They unwrapped the earth one layer at a time, as if coaxing memory from the skin of the world. They found pieces, a mosaic of dolphins chasing each other in a circle, a statue of Artemis, armless but defiant, fragments of amphory, still bearing traces of wine dried 2,000 years ago. They didn't rebuild Delos. They listened to her, and she spoke, not in words, but in echoes, in a way the stones fit together. as if still remembering how to hold one another. In the charred olive pits found beside the temples, remnants of feasts no one living had attended, in the footprints left in the dust, not by gods, but by those who once believed in them. It was not glorious. It was slow, painstaking. They mapped, cataloged, recorded, not to possess Delos, but to witness her, to preserve what could be preserved, of a silence too ancient to replicate. And as they dug, they began to dream, not of treasure, but of presence. They would sit on fallen columns at dusk, watching the last light stretch across the terrace of Alliance, and something in their faces, softened by time, lit by wonder, looked like prayer, because even the most rational mind, when faced with sacred stillness, must eventually bow. They dreamed of what once was. A flute played in the olive grove, a child lighting a clay lamp, a voice reciting verse in the courtyard of Apollo. Not fantasies, faint truths. They were not reconstructing the past. They were honoring it, letting it breathe again, through dust and care, through patience, and Delos allowed it, because these new visitors did not come to claim. They came to feel, and though they bore no myrtle branches, no sacrificial offerings, they brought something just as rare: attention, presence, respect. And so, slowly, gently, Delos stirred again, not with gods, but with memory, the kind that moves not through temples, but through fingertips tracing grooves in stone, the kind that grows in the hearts of those who listen without expectation. Even now, the archaeologists remain. They walk the same paths as priests once did. They sleep beneath the same stars. And sometimes, if the wind is right, they whisper thanks to the island as they brush sand from a mosaic long buried. Because they know Delos is not dead. She is simply quiet, and in her quiet, she holds the weight of a world that still dreams of meaning. Tonight, as you drift, you, too, become part of that quiet. You lay your thoughts down gently, like fragments to be uncovered later. You breathe slow, like the dust settling after the day's dig. And you remember, not in facts, but in feeling, because Delos is not just a ruin. She is a mirror, and when you look long enough, when you listen deep enough, you see yourself there, not broken, not lost, but waiting to be uncovered, piece by piece, light by light, dream by dream. Not all land is born from rock. Not all places are shaped by volcanoes or tectonic drift. Some places, rare and fragile, do not begin as earth. They begin as thought. Delos, they say, was one of those places. Before it was pinned to the seabed by Poseidon's trident. Before Apollo drew his first breath in its womb of sunlight and salt. Delos may not have been real at all. It may have been a dream. A sacred wish, an echo of divinity trying to take form. The ancients told us it floated, an island adrift, without anchor, without nation, invisible to the eye unless the gods allowed it to be seen. A phantom of stone and air, shimmering just beyond the horizon of the known. But what if it was not merely floating? What if Delos was dreaming? What if long before the first column was raised, long before the marble lions stared eastward toward the sun, the island was imagining itself? Imagine it now, a silence forming a shape, a thought gathering warmth, a ripple in the sea concentrating into will, not made, but becoming. Perhaps it was the dream of Leto, exiled and swollen with the burden of birth, calling out across an indifferent world for shelter. And the island answered, not because it was waiting, but because she called it into being. Or perhaps it was Apollo himself, not yet flesh, not yet born, shaping his own birthplace from the echo of light. And the dream took root, and the sea gave way, because sometimes The gods do not descend into the world. Sometimes the world rises to meet them. Delos may have done just that, not created by divine hands, but by divine longing, a longing so powerful it split the surface of the sea and rose into form. The dream became stone. The thought became land. But like all dreams, Delos remained fragile. Even at its height, its temples gleaming, its ports alive, there was a quality to the island that made it feel almost unreal. The way the shadows fell, the way the wind moved through the ruins, the way time refused to settle there. It was as though the island never stopped dreaming. And those who walked upon it, pilgrims, poets, merchants, lovers, entered that dream, even if just for a moment. That is the spell of Delos. It doesn't ask you to believe in its past. It invites you to join its imagination. Because places, too, can carry consciousness. Not human, not divine, but something ancient and in between. An awareness stitched into the land itself. Half asleep, half eternal. And that consciousness, on Delos, still dreams. It dreams of songs once sung beneath olive branches, of fires kindled with sacred oil, of feet walking softly across sun-warmed stone. It dreams of a time when light was new, and the gods were young, and the world still believed that beauty was a kind of truth. You can feel that dream, even now, not in museums, not in books, but in the hush that falls when you close your eyes. And think of an island that floats without moving, an island that remembers you, even if you've never stood upon it, because that's what dreams do. They recognize the dreamer. So tonight, as your breath deepens and your body becomes weightless, let yourself drift, not outward but inward, toward that quiet place where time is soft and memory has no edges. You are walking barefoot on a land shaped not by geography, but by need. And Delos welcomes you, not with gates, but with stillness, because you too have dreamed of sanctuary, of silence, of light that does not burn but reveals. And that dream was always Delos. Let it cradle you now. Let the island wrap around you like a thought just before sleep. You are part of its dreaming, and it is part of yours. Breathe in, and if you were standing on Delos, if the wind were low and the air still, you would feel it. Not just air, not just sea salt and time, but something finer, older, a powder too light to name, settling gently on your skin. Dust, but not the kind that gathers in forgotten rooms. Not the dust of neglect. This is sacred dust, the breath of what once was. On Delos, every gust carries it. Tiny fragments of time, lifted from the stones, danced into the sunlight, and placed softly back onto the earth, as if the past is exhaling. Slowly, endlessly, archaeologists call it sediment. Historians call it debris. But those who walk quietly enough, those who listen, know what it truly is. It is memory. The ground you step on was once walked by thousands. Their sandals kicked this dust into the air. Their voices stirred it. Their laughter, brief, bright, now vanished, left it vibrating in the smallest corners of ruined rooms. A woman once stood beside a temple pillar, clutching an offering wrapped in linen. She breathed in, and the air filled her lungs. The same air that now rests here, dispersed and transformed. Her exhale is still floating, settled now as golden powder on the lip of a shattered amphora. A boy ran barefoot through the sacred way, dragging a wooden toy carved by his father. His footsteps, light and wild, kicked up dust into the sun, and that dust still lingers. Time does not vanish. It gathers. It changes form. And on Delos, it gathers as dust. It's in the cracks of the marble lions, in the grooves where harp strings were once plucked, in the hollows of columns. where insects now hum lullabies older than myth. Sometimes it gathers in your palm. You lean against a ruin, and when you pull your hand away, a fine layer of history clings to your skin. It is not dirty. It is holy. This dust contains poems never written, names never spoken aloud, prayers whispered into wind, then forgotten by the mouths that shaped them, but not by the island. Delos remembers in powder, in what slips through fingers, in what coats the air with memory so faint. It feels like a feeling you once had in a dream. And now, you carry it too, not in your hands, but in your breath. Because even listening to this, even imagining it, is enough for that dust to rise. It enters your thoughts, like smoke from an old fire. It settles in the folds of your sleep, like warm ash on cold skin. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's what Delos always meant to be. Not a monument, not a ruin, but a breathing archive of everything too soft for stone to hold. This dust has no weight, but it holds weightlessness. It holds the shape of joy pressed into a footprint, the shape of grief left on a windowsill, the shape of devotion poured like oil into flame. So breathe again, and as your lungs fill, know this: you are breathing what the gods once breathed, what poets once exhaled between verses, what dancers scattered as they turned under sacred moonlight. You are not separate from the past. You're made of it. Its dust is your dust. Its breath is your breath. Its silence is your lullaby. Tonight, let's settle. Let it cover your worries like soft ash. Let it gather in your hair, your thoughts, your dreams. Sleep inside the breath of Delos, where nothing is lost, only transformed, and where you too become part of the dust and a memory it carries. Some temples remain standing, broken, yes, but proud. Others fall to ruin, their columns scattered, their walls consumed by lichen and silence. But a few, a rare few, descend. They surrender not to time, but to water. There's a place just off the coast of Delos, where the Aegean glimmers soft and shallow, clear as glass, still as breath. Beneath its surface, if the light is kind and your eyes are patient, you'll see it. Stone's column steps, too precise for nature, too reverent for accident. A temple, submerged, sleeping. It does not rise. It is not asked to be found. It lies there quietly, folded into blue. A monument not to gods, but to surrender. The sea took it, not all at once. Slowly, wave by wave, year by year, like a lullaby drawing a child towards sleep. Historians debate what it once was. A sanctuary to Artemis, a treasury, a shrine built by sailors who wished to anchor their prayers, where tides were fiercest, but those who dive beneath the surface, those who swim through light-struck silence, past schools of silver fish that blink like living coins, do not speak of archaeology. They speak of feeling. They speak of touching stone still warm with intention, of pressing their palm to a column and feeling it answer, not with words, but with presence. Because the sea does not erase. It enfolds. And this temple, this drowned place, has not vanished. It has transformed. Its ceilings are sky now. Its priests are fish. Its incense is salt. Its chants are the rhythmic hush of waves, stroking the steps where sandals once climbed. Imagine it. A festival once rose here. Torches reflected in water bowls. Hands raised in chorus. Garlands of olive wound around the marble. And now the garlands have become seaweed. The bowls empty. The voices silent. And yet, it is not gone. No sacred thing ever truly is. It is simply sleeping. And you may ask, why did the sea take it? Not out of punishment, not from wrath, but perhaps because even temples grow tired. Even stone needs rest. And what better rest than water? Cool, weightless, endless. The sea, after all, was the first cradle. Before land, before memory, before light. Perhaps the temple knew. Perhaps it chose to lay down, to let go, to sink into the arms of something older than gods. And so now it waits, not to be raised, not to be rebuilt, but simply to be a mystery held in stillness. Divers sometimes return with small objects, fragments of tile, a piece of statuary, water-worn smooth. They place them on land, photograph them, catalog them, but something always goes missing in translation. The temple is not meant to be taken. It is meant to be visited, as one visits a sleeping friend, careful not to disturb their dreaming. Because this is a place of dreaming, not for the gods, for the island. Delos, even in ruin, dreams of its former shape, and the temple beneath the sea, quiet, forgotten, intact in its surrender, is the shape of that dream. So tonight, as your own breath slows, as the surface of your thoughts stills like the Aegean at dusk, imagine descending, gently, slowly, light above, dimming, silence folding around you. You reach the steps. You place your hand on cool marble, slippery with moss and memory, and you pause, not to pray, not to ask, just to be in the presence of a sacred thing. That asked for nothing, but rest, and in doing so, became eternal. Sleep now in that water, not drowned, held. Let the sea rock you, let the silence bless you, and let the temple beneath the waves remind you. Even what disappears is not lost. Even what sinks is not broken. Even what sleeps still dreams. There are voices that speak without words, that pass through your hair, kiss the back of your neck, and vanish before you realize. You've been touched by memory. On Delos, that voice is the wind. It is older than the stones, older than the shrines, older than even the gods whose names once rang through temple halls. It was here before Leto arrived, before Poseidon drove his trident into the seabed, before the lions opened their mouths to eternity, and it has never left. The wind on Delos is not constant. It comes and goes, but never randomly. It arrives in moments of stillness, a sudden hush before a thought, a breeze that enters a room no longer whole, curling around broken columns, like fingers gently caressing the shoulders of a ghost. It carries no name, but it carries names. Thousands. The names of the forgotten, the ones never carved into stone, the ones erased by time, by conquest, by silence. The child who watched the sun rise over the marble lions, just once before sickness took him. The woman who placed a sprig of myrtle at Apollo's altar, then walked into the sea and never returned. The craftsman who carved a hymn into a lintel stone, knowing that no one would ever read it. The wind knows them. The wind remembers. Because on Delos, there are no cemeteries, no monuments to the nameless. Only this wind, a soft, eternal choir, composed of every breath once drawn on this island. It sings not in melody, but in movement. It stirs the olive leaves, lifts the dust, grazes the mosaic floors of villas abandoned for 2,000 years. And if you stand very still, if you let go of thought, if you open yourself the way a temple opens to light, you can feel it pass through you, not around you, through you. And for a moment, you are not just a visitor. You are part of the island, a vessel, a reed, a hollow bone through which memory flows. You may think it coincidence, when a chill stirs your spine beneath the hot sun. You may think it strange, that a whisper seems to echo in your ear, when no one is near. But this is no accident. The wind is speaking, not to you, but through you, because Delos was never meant to be a museum. It was meant to be a passage, between what was and what is, between sound and silence, between a name and the breath that carries it beyond forgetting. Even now, long after the last priest closed the sanctuary doors, the wind still moves along the sacred way. It enters the open courtyards. It hums low across the marble. It lingers in the hollows of broken statues. Sometimes it cries, but softly, like someone mourning not a death, but a memory too beautiful to bear. And sometimes it laughs, the laughter of children playing by the harbor, of women singing as they carried amphory, of a man composing verses by starlight, hoping someone might hear them in another life. And maybe you have, because tonight, the wind of Delos has reached you, through these words, through this stillness, through the space between your breath and your thought. It carries no name, but it carries everything you've ever forgotten to remember. So lie still now. Let the windows stay open, even if only in your imagination. Let the breeze of ancient silence slip across your skin. Let it pass through your ribs. Let it stir the dust in your chest. And know this, the wind that carries no name carries you. It has whispered through your life already, in the quiet griefs, the soft joys, the unexplained moments when you felt held by something you could not see. That was Delos, and she's still breathing, through the wind, through you, through everything that remembers without needing to know why. We think of marble as unfeeling, white, cold, final, the flesh of temples, the bones of statues. Beautiful, yes, but silent. But on Delos, you learn something different. You learn that marble is not stone. Not really. It is a sponge, a witness, a slow collector of everything that touches it, including light, especially light. The marble of Delos was quarried long ago, from mountains that breathed the same sky as the gods. It was carried over water, floated on the backs of boats that sang with the weight of devotion. It was hoisted, carved smooth, polished not for luxury, but for reverence. And when it was placed in temples, on steps beneath the gaze of the lions, it opened itself. It drank the light. Day after day, it bathed in it. The pink of dawn, the fire of noon, the honey gold of dusk. The marble absorbed every hue, every angle, every glimmer that fell from Apollo's sky. And it held it, not like a mirror, brief, fleeting, but like memory. It held light the way skin holds warmth long after the sun has gone, the way silence holds music long after the last note. So even now, when you walk among the broken colonnades, when you place your hand upon a sun-bleached wall, you feel it, the residue of radiance, the echo of illumination. You are not touching ruin. You are touching something that once shone and has never forgotten how. Because marble, for all its hardness, is tender. It remembers fingers. It remembers the shape of palms. It remembers being touched with faith, with fear, with longing. And most of all, it remembers being seen by the light, by those who stood before it, offering prayers with their bodies simply by being present. There's a story, quiet, half true, and entirely beautiful, that on Delos, the marble glowed on certain mornings, not just reflected light, but released it, as if, during the long hush of night, the stone had remembered the day, and in remembering, could not help but shine, as if it had loved being touched by the sun so much, that it tried, in its own slow language, to give some of that light back. There are places in the world that hold shadow, but Delos holds light, even in its collapse, even in its stillness, even the faded white that once gleamed like pearl, because memory does not fade with beauty. It deepens. It becomes quieter, richer, and so the marble waits, not to be restored, not to be praised, but simply to be witnessed again, not for what it once supported, but for what it still carries. Walk barefoot across it, and it warms to you, not in temperature, but in recognition, as if it sees your shadow stretching across it, and recalls the shadows of those who came before. And in that moment, time softens, time folds, and you're not a visitor. You are part of the light, just like them, just like the ones who once stood, wide-eyed, beneath the marble lintels, watching the morning sun slip between columns, and strike the altar with perfect golden fire. Tonight, as you lie in the hush of your own room, let that light return. Close your eyes and feel the marble beneath your dreams. Smooth, ancient, waiting. Let it shine with the memories it has held for thousands of years. Let it bathe you in light. You never saw, but somehow remember, because Delos may be stone, but is not cold. It is not gone. It is the island of light, still glowing, still open, and its marble, even broken, still knows how to shine. There is silence, and then there is Delian silence, a silence so complete, so living, that it ceases to be the absence of sound and becomes a presence in its own right. You feel it before you understand it. As your boat nears the shore, the waves hush, birdsong softens, your breath even becomes quieter, as if your body has remembered something your mind never knew it lost. And when your feet meet the earth, the silence wraps around your ankles, like old linen. It isn't heavy, it isn't cold, it's not the silence of death, nor the silence of abandonment. It is sacred silence, the kind once found in temples, when the last priest stepped away from the altar, the kind that lingers after a great truth has been spoken, and no words are worthy to follow. Delos was once filled with voices, with music, prayer, laughter, with market cries and festival songs, with children chasing light across the stones. But now, it is quiet, utterly, impossibly quiet, and yet, within that quiet, so much remains, because silence is not a void. It is a vessel. It holds everything that once filled the air, the footsteps, the invocations, the farewells whispered into wind. On Delos, silence has become its own kind of temple. Walk the sacred way today, and no one will stop you. No priest will anoint your forehead. No choir will raise its voice to greet the dawn. But the silence will. It will step into you, through your ears, into your chest, into the deepest folds of your thought. And in that moment, you will understand that silence is not the absence of memory. It is its container. This island does not speak because it does not need to. Its story is so vast, so layered, so woven into air and light and dust, that only silence is capable of holding it without distortion. Only silence can preserve the weight of so many centuries, without shattering under the burden. It is in that silence that the gods remain, not as figures, not as echoes, but as presence, still here, not hovering above, but folded into the island itself, not watching, but being. It's why no birds nest in the temple of Apollo, why the grass does not overrun the sacred lake, why the wind, even in its wildness, moves around the old sanctuaries, like a mourner walking among stones. This silence teaches you how to be still. It invites you, gently, patiently, to drop your questions, your noise, your need to name and to know. Because here, in this sacred hush, you do not need to understand. You only need to listen. And in that listening, you begin to hear things you never thought to notice. The breath of the earth beneath your feet, the faint hum of marble remembering music, the way the sky sounds when it rests against the edge of ruin. Tonight, as your body softens into rest, let that silence come, not as emptiness, but as presence. Let it settle on your skin, like starlight you can feel but not see. Let it enter your chest, not to take anything, but to remind you of everything you already carry. Because you too are a temple, not built of stone, but of memory. And within you, there are corridors where silence walks barefoot. There are altars lit only by the softness of your own breath. There is a sacred hush, waiting to be remembered. Let Delos show you, not with words, but with the sacredness of silence. Because in that silence, nothing is missing. In that silence, everything is held. Some places are discovered, some are conquered, some are forgotten, but a rare few are remembered, not by the world, by the soul. Delos is such a place. It doesn't need maps. It doesn't need crowds. It doesn't beg for reverence or restoration. It simply waits. Stone does not rush. Dust does not age. Light, once it touches a surface, leaves behind something that does not fade, only settles. And so the island has settled, not into death, but into stillness. Stillness that calls to something inside you that has also been waiting, waiting to rest, waiting to remember, waiting to return to a rhythm not found in hours or seconds, but in breath and presence. Because the truth is, Delos has never needed your belief. It doesn't ask for you to worship. It only asks that you arrive. And when you do, whether by boat, by story, by dream, you find that something in you recognizes this place. As if you've been here before, not in body, but in silence, in longing, as if some part of you once stepped barefoot across the stones of the sacred way, lifted your face to Apollo's light, and felt yourself seen, without needing to speak. The lions watch you still, not to judge, but to welcome. The wind brushes past your ear, whispering not in language, but in knowing. The marble holds its warmth beneath your palms, as if it remembers the shape of your shadow before you were born. And the silence, oh, the silence, opens around you like water. You don't fall into it. You return to it. This is the island that waits for you. Not in the future, not in the past, but now. In the hush between your thoughts. In the breath between your words. In the gentle ache you feel when beauty overwhelms you. But you don't know why. Delos has always been more than land. It is a doorway, a threshold between time and timelessness, between myth and memory, between the gods we once believed in and the divinity we carry still. And you, listener, dreamer, pilgrim of the heart, you have walked this island tonight, not with your feet, but with your presence. You have heard the stones, felt the wind, touched the dust, stood in temples long crumbled, but never collapsed. You have remembered what cannot be taught, that stillness is a sanctuary, that silence is not emptiness, but invitation, and that some places, once entered, do not leave you. Delos is now part of you. It has folded itself into your breath, woven itself into the soft dark behind your eyes. It will return in dreams, in moments of awe, in that quiet space you carry inside, where no one can follow, but everything is held. So sleep now, not to forget, but to deepen. Let the marble become your pillow. Let the waves become your lullaby. Let the light of a god long vanished glow softly beneath your ribs. And know this, the island is still there, waiting, patient, gentle. And when the world grows loud, when your soul grows weary, you need only close your eyes and return.